Dance of the Damned. The Dancing Plague of 1518 by Kerry Clark. No one knows why she danced, but they followed her, one by one, until the entire city joined the ritual. Chapter 1. The First Steps. Frau Margret Troffer woke to birdsong and stiff joints, the July heat already pressing through the shutters of her small home on Strasbourg's eastern edge. A peculiar restlessness hummed through her muscles as she swung her legs over the edge of the bed. Just a little movement, she thought, to chase the fog from her mind. Her husband, Conrad, had left before dawn for the Tanners' Guild. The house creaked with the emptiness. The familiar silence was her constant companion for these past 3 years. She kneaded the dough with practiced hands, her fingers finding comfort in the rhythm. Punch, fold, turn, punch, fold, turn. Then her right foot tapped. Just a little, barely noticeable at first. A gentle percussion against the packed dirt floor, keeping time with some unheard melody. Her left foot soon joined in, and within moments, her hips swayed slightly. Enough, she muttered, wiping flour from her palms. But her body was in a different mood. By the time the bread sat rising near the hearth, Margret found herself in the middle of her small home, arms outstretched, spinning once, twice, 3 times. Her feet lifted and fell, her skirts swishing against bare ankles. A waltz without music, a celebration without cause. "What am I doing?" she whispered, but her feet continued their pattern. Step, hop, turn. Step, step, turn. She caught her reflection in the small, polished metal hanging by the door. A wedding gift from Conrad's brother. Her face looked wrong somehow. Her smile was too wide, too fixed. Doll-like, her eyes were glassy. Margret reached for the doorframe to steady herself, but instead, her traitorous hand gripped the latch and pulled it open. The street beckoned. The marketplace buzzed just 3 lanes away. Her feet crossed the threshold without her permission. By midday, the citizens of Strasbourg had stopped to stare at the woman dancing in the central square. Not the coordinated moves of a festival dance, or the practiced steps of a minstrel. No, this was something else entirely. Jerking, twisting, leaping. Her skirts flew around her legs. Her hair had come loose from its cap, and most disturbing of all, her shoes had been kicked aside, her bare feet now bloody against the cobblestones. "Frau Troffer! Margret!" called Helga from the baker's shop. "Come rest yourself!" But Margret only smiled that terrible smile and continued her dance. Step, twist, hop, spin, leap, turn. There was something frantic in her movements now, something desperate. A crowd gathered. Children pointed and giggled behind cupped hands. Women whispered behind market baskets. Men frowned, uncomfortable with the display. "Someone fetch her husband," called Heinrich Suter, the blacksmith. "She's gone mad from the heat," declared Frau Weber, crossing herself. "Possession," muttered an elderly woman, clutching her prayer beads. "Mark my words." As the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, Margret danced on. Her feet left smears of blood on the stones beneath her. Sweat plastered her dress to her back. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Yet still she moved, her limbs jerking as though pulled by invisible strings. When Conrad finally arrived, his face pale with concern, he tried to grasp her arms, to still her frantic movement. "Margret, stop this! You'll injure yourself." For just a moment, their eyes met. Something flickered in Margret's gaze. Recognition, fear, pleading. Her lips parted as if to speak, but only a strangled sound emerged before her body twisted away from his grasp, spinning back into her relentless dance. "Stand back," ordered a commanding voice. The crowd parted for Dr. Johannes Geiler, the town physician, who circled Margret with professional curiosity. He observed her movements, noted the red flush of her cheeks, the wild dilation of her pupils. "A severe imbalance of the humors," he announced finally. hot blood gone putrid in the veins, agitating the limbs. "Well, make her stop," Conrad demanded, his voice breaking. The doctor stroked his beard thoughtfully. To stop her now could be fatal. When the body seeks to expel corruption, we must allow the natural process to complete its course. He nodded, satisfied with his own assessment. She must dance until the fevered blood cools. "She'll die from exhaustion first," Conrad protested. Dr. Geiler shrugged. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the dance will save her." He gestured to two young apprentices. "Clear space around her, give her room to swing, and someone fetch musicians." "Musicians?" Conrad was incredulous. "Of course," replied the doctor. "If she must dance, better she does so with proper rhythm. It will help regulate the expulsion of the hot humours." As the sun began its slow descent, the city council arrived, ledgers and quills in hand, to document this strange occurrence. They measured the circumference of Margret's dancing, noted the approximate number of steps per minute, and debated whether this constituted a violation of the ordinance against public dancing without permit. Paragraph 6, subsection 3 of the city statutes. "Technically," said Councilman Weber, adjusting his spectacles, "the statute specifies willful and recreational dancing. If she's diseased, it's not recreational, is it?" "But is it willful?" Councilman Muller replied, mishearing. "Intent must be established." While they debated legal technicalities, Margret danced on. The setting sun cast her elongated shadow across the square, a dark spectre twisting and leaping against the weathered buildings of Strasbourg. And somewhere deep inside her own body, trapped behind her eyes, the real Margret Troffer screamed for someone, anyone, to make it stop. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. By the third day, Margret's feet were raw masses of torn flesh. Each step left bloody imprints on the wooden stage the council had hastily constructed in the square. 4 musicians played continuously, rotating shifts to accommodate her ceaseless movement. The theory, as Dr. Geiler explained to the growing crowd of onlookers, was to harmonize her corrupted humors through structured rhythm. She hadn't stopped to eat, hadn't stopped to drink, except when Conrad pressed a ladle of water to her lips between spins. She hadn't stopped to sleep. But worse than that, Margret wasn't alone. On the morning of the second day, Frau Hirscher from the Milliners' Guild had joined her, dropping her basket of ribbons in the street and launching into a wild, jerking dance of her own. By sunset, 3 more had joined: a cobbler's daughter, a widow who sold eggs, and, most troubling, the wife of Councilman Adler. Now, as Margret entered her third day of continuous movement, 34 people danced alongside her on the crowded platform. Men, women, even 2 children, all with the same vacant expression, the same relentless energy, the same inability to stop. "It's spreading like contagion," muttered the priest, Father Gunther, as he sprinkled holy water around the platform's perimeter. The droplets evaporated almost instantly in the July heat. "Something unholy moves among us." Conrad Troffer sat slumped against a nearby wall, dark circles beneath his eyes. He hadn't left the square since Margret began dancing. The few times he'd taken her hands to still her movement, she'd either twisted violently away or tried to drag him into her rhythm for several steps before he broke free. "Your wife was the first," said a voice beside him. Conrad looked up to find Councilman Weber standing there, ledger tucked under his arm. "The council requires a statement. Was there anything unusual before she began? Strange foods? Foreign visitors? Unexplained purchases?" Conrad laughed bitterly. "The only unusual thing was her smile. Margret hasn't smiled since." He stopped himself, the familiar knot tightening in his throat. Weber's quill hovered expectantly above the page. "Since? Nothing." Conrad looked away toward the dancers. "She attended confession the day before, that's all." The councilman scribbled in his ledger. His lips pursed in disappointment at the lack of usable information. "The council has authorized additional measures," he he said. Musicians around the clock. More space for the afflicted. We're bringing in specialists from Heidelberg. And how exactly will more music help? Conrad demanded. Weber adjusted his spectacles. According to the medical consensus, we must let them dance it out. The corruption must exit the body naturally. He closed his ledger with a snap. The alternative would be restraint, which Dr. Geiler advises could drive the poison inward to the heart and brain, causing instant death. As the councilman walked away, Conrad watched his wife's wild movements. Somehow, impossibly, she maintained her pace. Though her dress was now torn at the hem, her hair a tangled mess, her feet barely recognizable as human appendages. What truly haunted him, though, was her face. The smile remained fixed, but her eyes, when he could catch them, were fully present, terrified, pleading, trapped inside a body that would not obey. Inside the prison of her own flesh, Margret Troffer was screaming. "Stop! Please, stop!" She begged her limbs, but they continued their relentless rhythm without her consent. Every muscle burned, each joint felt filled with shattered glass. Her lungs struggled for air, and her heart pounded so violently she was afraid it would burst through her ribs. And still she danced. Through her sweat-blurred vision, she saw the others who had joined her cursed ballet. Some looked as terrified as she felt. Others seemed lost in ecstasy, their faces transported. But none of them stopped. None of them could. During brief moments of clarity, when the pain receded enough for thought, Margret tried to understand what was happening to her. Was this God's punishment? Had something slipped inside her at confession, when she'd finally spoken of? No. Even in the privacy of her own mind, she couldn't form the words. The grief was too massive, the guilt too consuming. Instead, her thoughts scattered like startled birds as her body launched into another frantic series of leaps, her arms flailing as if trying to catch hold of something, anything, that might anchor her to the earth. By the end of the first week, the dancing plague had claimed over 70 souls. The council's temporary stage had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing number of afflicted. Merchants saw opportunity in tragedy, setting up food stalls around the perimeter, selling meat pies and sweetmeats to the spectators, who gathered daily to witness the macabre spectacle. 1 copper for a prime viewing spot, called an enterprising young boy, collecting coins from visitors. See the famous dancers of Strasbourg. The city's response had evolved from alarm to organization. The Guild of Musicians worked in rotational shifts, playing lively tunes to regulate the expulsion of humors. Water bearers circulated with ladles, attempting to hydrate the dancers between movements. A team of surgeons stood ready to bleed those who showed signs of collapse, believing that removing the corrupted blood might end their torment. At the council meeting, heated debate continued. "It's spreading too quickly," insisted Councilman Mueller, pounding his fist on the oak table. "We must quarantine the afflicted." "And where would you put 70 dancers?" countered Councilman Weber. "The city jail holds 20 at most." "The old grain warehouse," suggested another. "And risk the contagion spreading to our food stores?" Weber shook his head. "No, the physicians are clear. We must let them dance until the fever breaks." "The physicians know nothing," Father Gunther interrupted from the doorway, his clerical robes damp with sweat. "This is no natural malady. I have consulted with the bishop. This is spiritual corruption, either demonic possession or divine punishment." The council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. "What do you propose, Father?" asked Weber carefully. "Prayer, fasting, penitence." The priest's eyes burned with fervor, and for the worst afflicted, exorcism. After hours of heated debate, a compromise was reached. The dancers would be divided into groups. Some would be taken to the shrine of St. Vitus, patron of dancers, where the brothers would pray over them continuously. Others would remain under the care of the physicians. A third group would be subjected to the more extreme treatments proposed by a newly arrived specialist from Vienna, who believed that submerging the dancers in ice water might shock their systems back to normality. Margret Troffer, as the first afflicted, was assigned to the most extreme intervention, exorcism at the cathedral, followed by bleeding from all 4 limbs. When Conrad received news of the council's decision, he fought his way through the crowd surrounding his wife. Somehow, impossibly, she was still moving. 8 days without rest. Her dress hung in tatters. The flesh of her feet was almost completely gone, exposing tendons and bone that continued to flex and push against the blood-stained boards. "Margret!" he called, pushing away a water-bearer to reach her. "Margret, look at me!" For a moment, her wild movements slowed. Her head turned toward him, and in her eyes he saw complete lucidity, recognition, fear, and something else, resignation. "They're taking you to the cathedral," he explained quickly. "The priests, they believe they can help." Her eyes widened, and for the first time since this nightmare began, her lips formed words between gasps for air. "Not my fault." Before Conrad could respond, her body jerked back into its frenzied rhythm, spinning away from him. The brief connection severed. "What's not your fault?" he called after her, but she was lost again, consumed by the dance that possessed her. As night fell over Strasbourg, the first group of dancers, including Margret, were loaded onto carts, their limbs still twitching and jerking despite hemp ropes binding them to the wooden planks. The procession moved slowly through torch-lit streets toward the cathedral, where black-robed priests waited with holy water, blessed oils, and ancient rites meant to drive out whatever unholy presence had taken root in Strasbourg. Behind them, on the blood-slicked stage, dozens continued to dance under the stars, their shadows lengthening and multiplying in the flickering torchlight, like demons performing some terrible ritual upon the very heart of the city. Chapter 3. The breaking point. The cathedral stone walls echoed with screams. Not the screams of the dancers. They remained eerily silent despite their torment, but the shouts of the exorcists soared through the air. Their voices were raw from hours of continuous prayer, but they continued to try to save the souls they thought were at risk. Latin phrases bounced off ancient pillars, mingling with the sound of holy water splashing against fevered skin. Margret lay strapped to a wooden table, her limbs fighting against the leather restraints with such violence that the entire structure shook. 4 priests held the table steady, while a 5th pressed a crucifix against her forehead. Her body arched upward, only her heels and the back of her head maintaining contact with the wood. "Exorcismus te, omnis immundus spiritus," intoned Father Gunther, his voice hoarse from 18 hours of continuous ritual. "Omnis satanica potestas, omnis incursio infernalis adversarii." In the shadowed ambulatory surrounding the main altar, Conrad Troffer watched with horrified fascination. They had refused to let him near during the exorcism, claiming his presence might strengthen whatever demon possessed his wife. Beside him stood Dr. Geiler, his clinical gaze assessing the proceedings with professional skepticism. "This will not work," the physician murmured, too quietly for the priests to hear. "The corruption is in the blood, not the soul." Conrad barely heard him. His attention remained fixed on Margret's face. Even bound, even after days without proper food or rest, her body continued its desperate attempt to dance. Her ankles twisted against the restraints. Her hips lifted and fell into a grotesque rhythm. But it was her expression that haunted him, no longer the fixed smile of the early days, but a rictus of pure agony. "What's happening to her?" Conrad whispered. Dr. Geiler sighed. "In truth, I do not know. I've consulted the ancient texts, corresponded with colleagues in Paris and Vienna. Some suggest ergot poisoning from tainted rye. Others point to a collective melancholy brought on by hardship." "Hardship?" Conrad laughed bitterly. If hardship caused dancing, all of Strasbourg would be spinning like tops after the famine 3 years ago. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. Indeed. Though that famine took a particular toll on your household, did it not? Conrad's head snapped toward him. What do you mean? Your child, Gila said softly. The daughter born just before the grain stores failed. I attended your wife when the milk dried in her breasts, when the infant withered. Conrad's throat tightened. They never spoke of it. Not to others. Not even to each other. What has that to do with this? He demanded. Perhaps nothing, the doctor admitted. Or perhaps everything. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Sometimes the pain must exit somehow. Before Conrad could respond, a commotion near the altar drew their attention. Margret's restraints had snapped on one side, and her free arm whirled in frantic circles. 2 priests struggled to recapture the limb while Father Gunther shouted the exorcism rite with renewed vigor. Enough! Conrad pushed past the doctor, striding toward the altar. Stop this now! Stay back, Father Conrad commanded. We are at a critical juncture. But Conrad had reached the table. Margret's eyes locked with his, and in that moment of connection, her body went suddenly, completely still. The silence was shocking after so many days of continuous movement. Margret? Conrad whispered, reaching for her hand. Her lips parted. A rattle emerged from her throat, like the sound of autumn leaves skittering across cobblestones. Everyone in the cathedral leaned closer to hear. The children, she whispered, her voice cracked from disuse. All the lost children. Then her back arched in a violent spasm. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, and her eyes rolled back to show only the whites. When the seizure passed, her body resumed its dance, more frantic than ever, despite the remaining restraints. Father Gunther crossed himself. The demon speaks in riddles to confuse us. That was no demon, Conrad said quietly. That was my wife. Dr. Geiler appeared at his side. We must try another approach. This is clearly ineffective and may be causing more harm. What do you suggest? Conrad asked, desperately. Blood removal. Extensive and immediate. The doctor gestured to his assistants waiting in the shadows. We must drain the corruption from all 4 limbs simultaneously. Conrad looked back at Margret, still thrashing against her bonds. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. The flesh around the restraints was rubbed raw, and her eyes, when they occasionally rolled forward, showed nothing but agony. Will it hurt her? He asked. The doctor placed a hand on his shoulder. She is already in pain beyond our comprehension. This may be her only salvation. Conrad nodded reluctantly. Do what you must. As the physicians moved forward with their gleaming instruments, Father Gunther stepped back, making the sign of the cross. May God have mercy on her soul, for I believe we have failed. Outside the cathedral, the dancing continued unabated. What had begun with one woman had grown to over 100 souls, all caught in the same inexplicable compulsion. The council's ordered response had collapsed into chaos as the numbers swelled beyond their capacity to manage. On the expanded platform, dancers collapsed from exhaustion, only to be dragged away and replaced by newly afflicted citizens. The musicians played with bandaged fingers, their instruments slick with their own blood from days of continuous performance. The city militia now guarded the perimeter, preventing spectators from getting too close to the dancers, fearful of further contagion. Among the onlookers stood Helga Weber, basket clutched to her chest, watching with horrified fascination. Her cousin had joined the dancers just yesterday, a sober man of 30 who had never shown an interest in festivities. Now he leapt and spun with the rest, his face contorted in either ecstasy or agony. It was impossible to tell which. They say it's spreading downstream, said a voice beside her. A stranger, a traveling merchant by his dress. Villages along the river report similar outbreaks. God preserve us, Helga murmured, crossing herself. What causes it? The merchant shrugged. Some say demonic possession. Others blame the foreigners, or corrupted water. In Colmar, they're burning effigies to cleanse the air. Helga watched as a young woman in the center of the platform suddenly collapsed, her legs finally giving out after what must have been days of continuous movement. Instead of lying still, however, her torso continued to twist and jerk, her arms flailing as if still trying to dance despite her failed limbs. "Did you know the first?" the merchant asked, nodding toward the cathedral. "The woman they're exercising now? Margret Troffer?" Helga nodded. "Not well, but yes. A quiet woman. Reserved. Her husband is a tanner. They kept to themselves after. She trailed off, suddenly uncomfortable." "After what?" Helga lowered her voice. "They lost a child in the famine. A little girl, just an infant. Many did, of course, but Margret took it hard. Stopped coming to market days. Missed church sometimes. People talked." The merchant seemed to consider this. "And did others who dance also lose children?" The question struck Helga as odd, but she thought about it. Widow Hirscher had lost adult sons to the plague 2 years prior. The cobbler's daughter had miscarried twins last winter. Councilman Adler's wife had buried 3 children before they reached their 5th birthdays. "Some, yes," she admitted. "But surely not all of them." Before the merchant could respond, a commotion near the cathedral steps drew their attention. The massive oak doors had opened, and a procession emerged. At its center, strapped to a stretcher and still jerking rhythmically against her bonds, was Margret Troffer. Her arms were bandaged at the wrists and elbows, dark stains seeping through the linen. Her skin had the waxy look of the newly dead, but still her body moved in that unstoppable dance. Behind the stretcher walked Conrad Troffer, his face a mask of grief. Beside him, Dr. Geiler conferred with a new, expensively dressed physician who had arrived from Vienna just that morning. "Where are they taking her?" someone in the crowd called out. "The shrine of St. Vitus," replied a city guard. "By order of the council, all dancers are to be removed from the city proper." As the procession passed through the square, something extraordinary happened. The dancers on the platform, as if sensing Margret's presence, turned in unison toward her. Their movements synchronized briefly, all performing the same jerking steps, the same twisting arm gestures. 100 bodies moving as one, like a grotesque corps de ballet. Then, as Margret was carried beyond the square, the dancers returned to their individual frenzies. The moment of unity shattered. Helga shivered despite the summer heat. "Did you see that?" she whispered to the merchant, but when she turned, he was gone. In his place stood a small, sallow-faced girl, only 7 or 8 years old. She stared up at Helga with dark, solemn eyes. "They're dancing for the dead," the child said, her voice oddly mature. "For all the ones we forgot to mourn." Before Helga could respond, the girl slipped away into the crowd, leaving behind only a lingering sense of unease, and the distant, continuous sound of feet drumming against wooden boards. 100 heartbeats pounding out of sync. Chapter 4. The Final Measure. The shrine of St. Vitus clung to the mountainside like a stubborn barnacle, 3 hours of an arduous journey from Strasbourg. Built of grey stone that absorbed the summer heat, its interior remained blessedly cool, a sanctuary. Under normal circumstances, it was a place of quiet contemplation, tended by a small brotherhood of monks dedicated to the patron saint of dancers. Now it echoed with the sound of shuffling feet and labored breathing, as 43 of the most severely afflicted dancers were arranged in the main chapel, their bodies still moving despite restraints, despite exhaustion, despite the blood loss from the physician's treatments. Margret Troffer lay near the altar, directly beneath the painted wooden statue of St. Vitus. Her condition had deteriorated significantly during the journey. The bandages around her arms were soaked through, the bleeding apparently worsened by her continuous movement. Her breathing came in short, ragged gasps. Yet still she danced, her body refusing stillness even as it failed. Conrad knelt beside her, bathing her forehead with cool water from the shrine's blessed spring. The journey had been torturous, watching her thrash against the restraints as the cart bounced over rutted roads. More than once, he'd considered mercy. A pillow held over her face, a quick end to her suffering. But each time the thought arose, he pushed it away, clinging to desperate hope. Brother Thomas believes the proximity to the saint may bring healing, said Dr. Geiler, approaching with a cup of herbal infusion. Several of the less severe cases have shown improvement already. Conrad didn't look up from his task. Improvement or exhaustion. The doctor sighed, setting the cup down beside them. It can be difficult to distinguish between the two. A soft moan escaped Margaret's lips, drawing Conrad's immediate attention. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing briefly on his face. Again, that moment of lucidity, of recognition. "Conrad," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the shuffling and moaning of the other dancers. "I'm here," he said, taking her hand carefully to avoid disturbing the bandages. "I'm right here, Margret." Her lips moved again, forming words he couldn't hear. He leaned closer until his ear nearly touched her mouth. "Not my fault," she repeated, the same words she'd managed in the cathedral. "Couldn't save her." Conrad's throat tightened painfully. "No one could, Margret. The famine took so many." Her body spasmed, back arching off the stone floor. When the seizure passed, tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, cutting clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "Dancing for her," she gasped. "For all of them." Before Conrad could respond, her eyes rolled back, and her body resumed its now familiar rhythm, the moment of clarity lost. But her words lingered in the air between them, heavy with implication. Dr. Geiler had moved away to check on the other patients, giving Conrad the privacy to absorb what his wife had said, dancing for her, for all of them. The lost children, the grief no one was allowed to express openly, because survival demanded forward movement, work, production, contribution to the city's recovery. "You never got to mourn her properly, did you?" he whispered, more to himself than to Margret. "Neither of us did. The funeral was so quick, so efficient. And then we were told to continue, to be productive citizens, to show strength." Around him, the other dancers continued their macabre ballet. Looking at them now, Conrad saw not the possessed or the diseased, but the bereaved. Each body told a story of loss, whether from plague, famine, war, or just the cruelty of fate. Each dance was a language of grief that had no other outlet in proper society. Night fell over the shrine, the stone walls now illuminated only by candlelight. The monks had begun a continuous chant, their voices rising and falling in ancient prayers to St. Vitus. The sound echoed strangely in the chapel, creating acoustic patterns that seemed to both match and counter the rhythms of the dancers. Conrad had not left Margret's side, though Dr. Geiler had urged him several times to rest. He maintained his vigil, wiping her brow, moistening her lips with water, speaking softly to her, though he had no way of knowing if she heard or understood. "Do you remember," he murmured, "when we first met at the spring fair? You were selling ribbons at your father's stall. I bought a blue one, though I had no use for it, just to talk to you." Her movements had grown weaker over the hours, her body finally succumbing to exhaustion. But still she danced, her arms making small circular motions, her feet sliding against the stone floor. "You wore yellow that day, the color of sunlight. I thought you were the most beautiful creature I'd ever seen." A monk approached silently, placing a hand on Conrad's shoulder. "You should eat something, Master Tanner. Your wife would not want you to neglect yourself." Conrad nodded absently, but didn't move. "Has anyone stopped dancing yet? Recovered?" The monk's face remained carefully neutral. 3 have found peace since sunset. Peace? Conrad looked up sharply. You mean they've died? Their suffering has ended, the monk said gently. We must trust in God's mercy. As if on cue, a wail arose from across the chapel. A woman had collapsed completely, her body finally still, after days of continuous movement. 2 monks knelt beside her, one closing her eyelids, the other already beginning prayers for the departed. Conrad turned back to Margret, panic rising in his chest. Her movements were growing even fainter, the rise and fall of her chest almost imperceptible. No, he whispered fiercely. Not you too. Not yet. He gathered her into his arms, cradling her against his chest, despite the weak protests of her limbs, still attempting to dance, even now. Stay with me, Margret. Please. Her eyes fluttered open once more, finding his face in the dim candlelight. Her lips parted. Let me go, she whispered. I can't, he said, tears streaming freely now. I've already lost our daughter. I can't lose you, too. A strange calm seemed to settle over her features. The frantic movement of her limbs slowed. Her face stilled, and with a deliberate effort. Perhaps the first true control she'd exercised over her body in nearly 2 weeks. She was completely motionless. She's waiting, Margret said, her voice suddenly clearer than it had been since this nightmare began. I can hear her. Conrad held her tighter, as if his embrace could anchor her to the world. Don't leave me, Margret. Please. Her hand lifted, trembling with effort, and touched his cheek. An intentional movement, not part of the dance that possessed her. Let me dance to her. Around them, the chanting of the monks grew louder. The candlelight seemed to intensify, casting long shadows across the chapel walls. The other dancers' movements slowed in unison, as if the entire room were being drawn into a shared experience, a collective vision. Conrad felt something shift in the air, a presence, a warmth, a sense of something just beyond perception. He looked down at Margret, whose face had transformed. The pain was gone, replaced by something like wonder. Her eyes focused on a point just beyond his shoulder, widening with recognition and joy. Do you see her? He asked, his voice breaking. Margret's lips curved into a genuine smile, showing true happiness. Yes, she breathed. Our beautiful girl. Conrad turned, following her gaze, but saw only shadows and candlelight. Yet something had changed in the chapel's atmosphere, as if a veil had temporarily thinned between worlds. When he looked back at Margret, her body had gone completely still. The dance that had possessed her for nearly 2 weeks had finally ended. Her eyes remained open, fixed on whatever vision brought her such peace in her final moments. As Conrad held his wife's lifeless body, rocking gently back and forth in his grief, a strange phenomenon occurred throughout the chapel. One by one, the dancers slowed their movements. Some collapsed in exhaustion, others simply stopped, looking around in confusion as if waking from a trance. By midnight, only a handful continued their relentless dance. The Strasbourg dancing plague claimed the lives of dozens before it finally subsided. Official records documented 63 deaths, though some chronicles placed the number higher. Hundreds more were affected, many left with permanent injuries, broken bones that never properly healed, hearts weakened by prolonged exertion, minds forever altered by the experience. Various explanations were offered by authorities. The church maintained it was a spiritual affliction, a form of possession or divine punishment for the city's sins. Physicians argued for natural causes, poisoned water, tainted grain, an overabundance of melancholy in the summer air. The city council, in their final report, simply classified it as a temporary madness of unknown origin. New ordinances were enacted. Public dancing was restricted to specific festivals under careful supervision. Music in taverns was regulated to prevent excessive stimulation of the humours, and a chapel was built in the central square, dedicated to St. Vitus, meant to protect the city from future outbreaks. Life in Strasbourg gradually returned to normal. The marketplace bustled again with commerce. The cathedral bells rang for daily prayers. Guilds continued their work, producing goods to maintain the city's prosperity. But for those who had witnessed the dances, especially those who had lost loved ones to the mysterious affliction, something had fundamentally changed. They spoke more openly of their losses. Children were held tighter. They allowed themselves moments of remembrance for those who had passed before their time. Margret Troffer returned to his work at the tannery, a quieter man than before. In the small garden behind his house, he planted yellow flowers, the colour Margret had worn the day they met. And sometimes, in the privacy of his home, he would dance slowly with her memory, moving to music only he could hear. On the first anniversary of the dancing plague, he visited the new chapel in the square, lighting a candle for Margret and their daughter. As he knelt in prayer, an old woman approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She danced for love, you know," the woman whispered. "All of them did. For those they couldn't save, couldn't protect, couldn't properly mourn." Conrad looked up, startled. "How did you—" "Some danced for God," the woman continued, her eyes distant. "Some for country, for family. Not one was asked if they wanted to stop. The world needs its dancers to keep spinning, even when their hearts are breaking." Before Conrad could respond, she was gone, moving through the chapel with surprising grace for one so elderly. He watched her disappear through the door, a strange sense of peace settling over him. Outside, the square bustled with life, merchants calling their wares, children playing, officials measuring and documenting as they always did. But now, occasionally, people paused in their daily routines. They looked up at the sky, or closed their eyes in brief remembrance, or simply acknowledged the precarious miracle of existence. In the center of it all, where the dancers had once performed their desperate ballet, a simple stone marker had been placed. Most citizens hurried past without noticing it, but those who stopped to read the inscription found these words: "For those who danced when words failed, for those who moved when the world demanded stillness, for those who spoke with their bodies what their hearts could not bear to say." And beneath these lines, added later by an unknown hand, "She danced for God, for country, for love, and none of them asked her to stop." Author's note: dance like everyone's watching and judging. The dancing plague of 1518 really happened. Yes, seriously. In the sweltering summer of that year, dozens and eventually hundreds of citizens in Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, now France, danced uncontrollably for days, even weeks. Contemporary reports describe exhausted bodies, collapsing, bloody feet, and deaths from heart attack, stroke, or pure physical exhaustion. The council's solution? Build a bigger dance floor and hire musicians. Medieval public health at its finest. There's a lot that is historically accurate. Frau Troffer did start it, around July 1518, dancing alone for hours before others joined. Authorities brought in musicians to help the dancers by giving them structure, hoping it would purge the illness faster. It didn't. Doctors of the time diagnosed it as overheated blood or an imbalance of the humours. Some religious leaders blamed sin and spiritual corruption, calling for exorcisms and pilgrimages to the shrine of Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers, among other things. The death toll is disputed, but some chronicles claim dozens died, a chilling detail. Later cases of dancing mania popped up elsewhere in Europe, although they weren't as large as Strasbourg. There was legitimate debate among the council over how to classify the dancing legally. Was it voluntary? Was it criminal? Was it contagious? What's fictionalized, but emotionally true? Margret Troffer's personal life, grief, and marriage to Conrad are imagined, giving a human perspective to what could otherwise seem like an absurd event. Historical records don't tell us much about her beyond her first name, and that she started dancing. Conrad, Dr. Geiler, Councilman Weber, Helga, and others are fictionalized composites drawn from real types of people recorded in the town's records. Physicians, priests, council members, bakers, blacksmiths. The link between collective trauma, like famine or plague, and the outbreak is highly plausible, but not conclusively proven. Modern scholars have floated theories: mass psychogenic illness, ergot poisoning, starvation, induced psychosis. No single answer fits perfectly. The moment where the dancers turn in unison toward Margret is invented, but it felt right. Symbolically, the plague was bigger than any one dancer. It was a communal grief. The haunting appearance of the little girl and the final unveiling of mourning as movement? These were entirely fictional, but, I think, emotionally truer to the underlying horror than any clinical diagnosis. These facts are horrifying. The people were real. The emotions, the terror, the guilt, the need to move when you can't speak, those are universal. If the same madness struck now, would we be wiser? Or would we just live stream it? Postscript. I've used British English for this story as I prefer to use this dialect when writing historical literature, unless it is set in America and I write in US English. So, if you are going cross-eyed at the spelling, that might be the reason. Historical Side Effects Disclaimer. Dancing Plague Edition. This story is for entertainment purposes only. Please do not attempt to diagnose 16th century mass hysteria using social media comments or medieval bloodletting charts. Side effects may include uncontrollable footwork, spontaneous jigging, socially contagious cardio, hallucinations involving saints with rhythm, and dangerous levels of interpretive dance. Do not dance for more than 72 hours without consulting your local bishop, apothecary, or plague doctor. Refrain from dancing in traffic, marketplaces, or near suspiciously cheerful minstrels. May cause hallucinations of divine punishment, extreme hydration needs, loss of dignity, and a total breakdown of civic order. Town-wide choreography not included. Not recommended for those with weak ankles, musical envy, or a belief that joy should be rationed during crises. If symptoms persist, it may not be spiritual possession. It may just be Strasbourg. Seek rest, not rhythm. This episode has been brought to you by trauma, famine, and a serious lack of hobby options in 1518.